Hey guys. Tonight we step inside a medieval tavern to find out what it was really like in the ale, the food, the noise, and the characters you'd meet by the fire. It was the unsung heart of any town, the news desk nobody appointed, and about the only spot where a knight, a farmer, and a wandering bard could all get equally drunk and equally pickpocketed. Drinking was only half of it. Beneath one low thatched roof, danger, laughter, and disease all rubbed shoulders without a second thought. Before we go on, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing who's joining in from around the world. You've been slogging down a muddy lane that reeks of horse, wood smoke and soup you'd rather not investigate. It's raining naturally or just stopped, so everything's slick, including the one pair of shoes you own. You're worn out, your belly's empty, and a cart of turnips has nearly flattened you twice. What you need is a drink. But how does a person even find a tavern in a medieval town? There are no glowing signs, no star ratings, no little voice on a phone telling you to turn left. What you do have is a pair of ears. So follow the din. Somewhere past the blacksmith at his forge and the fishmonger bellowing about his fresh river eels, there rises a tangle of laughter, shouting, and one determined soul belting out a song about a goose. And there it stands, a lopsided wooden building tilting to one side, as though the very timber has had a few too many. Above the door swings a weathered sign, barely readable, showing a crude painting of, is that a barrel, or a bear, or somehow both? No matter. This is the place. Welcome to the tavern. The doorstep is slippery with spilled ale, and when you heave the heavy iron-hinged door open, it groans out a creak so long it nearly counts as an act of its own. At once a wave of warm air rolls over you, thick with smoke, damp wool, flat beer, and meat of uncertain origin, landing on your face like a drunken handshake. You've arrived. Inside, the ceiling hangs low enough that tall men stoop and drunk men crack their skulls. The floor is dirt, not as a figure of speech, but actual earth, with straw thrown down to seem cleaner. It doesn't work. There are no private nooks, no servers gliding about with menus, no such thing as a hushed chat. A medieval tavern comes in exactly two modes, rowdy and shut because something caught fire. You spot a free seat on a crooked bench by the hearth, damp with something you decide not to investigate. Nearby, one man loudly disputes the theft of a chicken. Another has slumped into sleep with a ladle still in his fist. A one-eyed dog gnaws a bone beneath a table with the settled air of a creature who covers the rent. And all of this is merely the doorway. You've barely stepped inside, and already it smells like a night you'll either treasure or work hard to forget. As the door bangs closed behind you, the gloom settles over your senses like a damp wool blanket, warm, itchy, and faintly untrustworthy. Your eyes take their time adjusting. Candle flames waver against soot-blackened walls, throwing shadows that lurch until even the chairs look ready to start something. In the far corner the hearth roars, serving as both heating and an open invitation to disaster. Smoke loiters in the air, never quite finding its way up a chimney that may well be plugged with a long-dead crow. Yet the thing that strikes you hardest isn't the racket or the warmth, it's the smell. A medieval tavern doesn't so much have a fragrance as a form of lingering emotional injury. Riding on top is the ale, warm, sour, and flung across every surface. Underneath sits sweat, decades of it, some human, some horse, and some you can't quite place. Add a note of mouldy bread, a breath of wet straw, and the faint sigh of boiled onions, and you've got a blend no perfume maker would dare bottle. The tables wear years of carved initials, rough doodles and knife marks, and they wobble with a kind of proud stubbornness. The benches groan beneath muddy boots, heavy cloaks, and a great many poor decisions. The floor, dirt as promised, is strewn with straw to mop up spillage, spittle, and the occasional patron who's lost consciousness. Tread with care, one misstep, and your foot slides into something whose texture is best left to the imagination. The crowd behaves like one great living, breathing creature. In one corner laughter bursts out. In another, two men bicker over the going rate for a pig. A woman brings her mug down so hard that half of it leaps out, and not a single head turns. At the next table, a fellow gazes at you with the glazed look of a man either lost in deep thought or unsure how a chair functions. Somebody sneezes, and the entire left half of the room leans away as one. And still, for all the affront to your modern nerves, something about it feels oddly welcoming. The tavern is alive, coarse, unpolished, wholly unfiltered, the medieval answer to a community centre, minus the hygiene and with roughly 4 times the shouting. You claim your seat. It's a touch damp. It may well be cursed. But for tonight, it belongs to you. At first glance, the layout suggests someone set out the furniture mid-earthquake and never bothered to fix it. There's no plan, no proper bar, no snug booths at the back, just a rambling, uneven scatter of tables, benches, barrels, and the odd wooden crate pressed into service as a chair. Everything sits too close together or too far apart, depending largely on how much you've had. The hearth is the one real anchor of the room, a great open blaze against a wall, doing its best to hand out warmth, light, and a generous dose of indoor smoke. People huddle around it for comfort, like moths that happen to be holding mugs. Whoever grabs the choice seats hoards the heat. As for everyone else, well, that's what ale is for. Behind it looms the tavern keeper, juggling the pouring of drinks, the barking of orders, and the pointed glare aimed at the fellow in the corner that says, "You still owe me for last Tuesday." Menus don't exist. You ask what's on offer and steal yourself. The reply tends to be ale, or else wait quietly and stop asking. A cramped staircase, probably as old as the building and definitely splintery, climbs to the rooms above. Squint hard, and you might spot a single boot dangling from a railing post. Nobody can say whether it's decoration or a warning. Some taverns keep a back room. It might be for storage. It might be for gambling of the illegal sort. Or it might be where the last person who mocked the barmaid was quietly escorted, never to surface again. Wisest not to ask. The walls are darkened with candle soot. The windows are sealed with greasy cloth or stretched animal hide, and every surface has been buffed to a shine by the elbows, boots, and spilled drinks of generation upon generation, possibly a chicken too. Somehow, in spite of the mayhem, or maybe thanks to it, the whole thing functions. Everyone knows where to head, how to sit, when to raise their voice, and when to duck. It isn't tidy, but it is unmistakably alive. Every medieval tavern answers to a ruler, and it isn't the local lord or the tax collector. It's the tavern keeper. No crown sits on their head, But make no mistake, this is the person running the whole operation. Their cook, waiter, bookkeeper, minder and dispenser of barroom justice, all rolled into one. A one-person institution who tolerates absolutely no nonsense. If it's a man, he's likely shaped like a barrel that grew arms, weathered and short-tempered and seemingly carved from cured meat and regret. If it's a woman, and more often than not it is, she's keener than a blacksmith's file and able to quiet a whole room with one look. Whichever it is, they've witnessed it all, heard far worse, and scrubbed blood out of the straw before breakfast. Regulars earn a nod, strangers earn suspicion, and troublemakers earn a tankard to the skull. Behind the bar they keep mental accounts of who has paid, who's in the red, and who's had at least 3 too many, all of it kept in their head, since reading and writing were scarce in those days, but a tavern keeper's memory is a fearsome thing. The keeper sets the mood of the place. When they're cheerful, the room hums along nicely. When they're not, you'd be wise to drink quickly and keep your jokes to yourself. They referee every quarrel, judge every accusation of cheating, and are first to reach for a club the moment fists start flying. You simply do not cross the tavern keeper. They also know everything. Who's drowning in debt? Who's carrying on an affair? Who rode into town under a name that isn't theirs? Want information? Slip the barkeep something. Want protection? You better hope you didn't shatter a mug last week. Some have a helper, a son, a daughter, a spouse, or an orphan they more or less took in, who's now made to haul barrels that outweigh them. These assistants ferry drinks, sweep floors, and try their best not to spill a drop or get trampled by the drunks. So although the tavern might seem like pure disorder, it's really a delicate little ecosystem. And at the heart of it, presiding over it all like a storm god in an apron, stands the one soul keeping the ale in motion and the roof from caving into a riot, the tavern keeper. So at last you lower yourself onto a groaning bench, ducking stray elbows and airborne stew. Your throat's parched, your boots are soaked, and the moment has come for the real event, the drink. Just don't expect a wine list or a spotless goblet. This is a medieval tavern. Your options are few, lukewarm, and quite possibly hazardous to your survival. Start with the old standby, ale. Unfiltered, unpasteurized, and usually brewed in the back room where the dog naps. It's thick and murky, and tends to arrive with things floating in it, flecks of grain, a bit of yeast, or perhaps a stray piece of the last customer's moustache. It isn't chilled, because ice is nowhere to be found, and you don't ask how many days it sat in the barrel. You just drink, and you hope. After that comes mead, or honey wine. Sounds rather elegant, doesn't it? In truth, it's sweet, potent, and every so often faintly explosive. If the keeper brewed it themselves, it may be a delight, or it may taste like remorse and bee venom in equal measure. It's poured for nobles, wedding guests, or that one bard who refuses any payment but gold or mead. Then there's cider, pressed from apples that were either picked that morning or found on the ground some 3 weeks back. Sharp and tangy, it's served in cracked mugs, likely to be doing duty as soup bowls come sunrise. It's the favoured drink of orchard-heavy regions, or of anyone wanting something just alcoholic enough to blot out the smell of the man wedged beside them. Wine? Technically, yes. But unless you happen to be in southern Europe or the nobility is passing through, it's probably watered down, turning to vinegar, and served with a helping of sarcasm. The good stuff is set aside for lords, bishops, and the merchant who's just offloaded a dozen crates of salt. And water. Now that's a daring pick, because half the time it's swimming with invisible death. Boiling it costs precious fuel, and clean wells are hard to come by. Which is exactly why even the children drink ale. It was never about the buzz, it was about not being carried off by dysentery before your 8th birthday. Nobody here is measuring out shots or mixing cocktails. You drink from mugs of wood, clay, or tin, some still holding a residue of last night's stew. You lift your mug, give it a cautious sniff, and take a sip. It's warm, it's bitter, and somehow it's just right. Because in the medieval tavern, if it's wet and doesn't kill you on the spot, it counts as a fine vintage. So, you survive the drink. Barely. And now your stomach lets out a growl, reminding you that nothing's passed your lips since sunrise, and your last meal was mostly barley and quiet despair. Time has come to eat, though there is little reason to grow excited about it. No menu is offered, no waiter appears, and certainly no one pauses to ask whether you have any dietary needs. In a medieval tavern, you do not order a meal at all. You simply ask what remains and then quietly hope it arrives, warm and only mildly mysterious. The undisputed centerpiece of the table is pottage, a dense stew assembled from whatever grains, vegetables, and vaguely identifiable proteins happen to be within reach that morning. The same pot has been simmering since Monday, and by now it is Thursday. Fresh scraps are tossed in each day, yet nothing is ever taken out, which makes it less a dish and more a slow-cooked archive of the week. Should meat turn up, count yourself fortunate. It is likely rabbit, pigeon, or the particular chicken that made the poor decision to stray too near the flames. If it happens to be game, it may prove genuinely tasty, or it may have aged well beyond good sense and been finished with a generous pinch of desperation. Your bowl is carved from wood or shaped from clay, and your spoon is either one you brought yourself or the fingers you were born with. Most travellers keep a knife of their own, so dining here is very much a bring-your-own-utensils affair. Napkins are a fantasy. There is only the sleeve of your tunic or a communal rag that has witnessed things it would rather forget. Bread is available as well, though it arrives tough, dark, and dense enough to double as a blunt instrument. If it yields softly, it was baked that morning. If it resists like stone, it was baked the week before. Either way, it goes nicely with a cheese that carries the aroma of a well-worn boot and seems to have grown a personality of its own. On some evenings there is salted fish, on others pickled eggs, and now and then a tavern advertises a special, which is merely a dignified way of admitting they have a surplus of something to unload. Flavour is negotiable, and texture is a genuine surprise. Even so, in the wavering firelight, surrounded by noise, with something warm cradled in your hands, it is honestly not unpleasant. It fills you. It is hot. And provided you resist studying whatever is bobbing in the broth, it may even feel like comfort. You did not come here for refined cuisine. You came to eat the way a survivor eats. Once you have claimed a seat, ideally one that does not already have a knife lodged in it, the true spectacle reveals itself, and that spectacle is the people. A medieval tavern is the earliest version of a social feed, loud, disorderly, only partly honest, and wholeheartedly devoted to oversharing. Just to your left, a farmer flushed a deep red is already several ales into the evening, recounting for the 4th time the tale of his cow that delivered her calf sideways. He taps your shoulder in the middle of a sentence as though you were a treasured old companion, or at least a suitable stand-in for the pig he usually drinks beside. Across the room, a hooded figure keeps to the shadows, sipping slowly and saying nothing. He may be a monk who fled his monastery, a bandit, or simply a man who finds eye contact difficult. Whichever it is, striking up a chat with him is unwise, unless vanishing behind the stables appeals to you. By the hearth, a soldier in dented armour holds a small crowd captive with battle stories featuring dragons, a pack of Frenchmen, and a sword that apparently spoke. It is plainly untrue. Nobody minds in the slightest. His tankard is full, and his listeners are laughing. Nearby, a merchant, loud and glistening with sweat, keeps announcing grain prices that no one requested, drawing gold coins from his purse like a man practically inviting a robbery before the night is out. At a warped table, two locals bend over a game of dice, faces taut with concentration. One of them is unmistakably cheating. The other has noticed and permits it anyway, most likely saving the confrontation for the moment his ale runs dry. In a corner, a bard plucks his strings, voice fraying on the high notes of a love song that sounds suspiciously invented on the spot. Nobody objects. He is wearing trousers and he is roughly in tune, which already places him ahead of whoever performed the previous night. Women move through the crowd, some of them tavern staff, others tending to affairs of their own. They are sharp-eyed, self-assured, and absolutely not to be underestimated. Depending entirely on your manners, they will flirt, laugh, or rearrange your teeth. Children occasionally weave between the legs of the drinkers, snatching a forgotten crust or a stray coin. No one moves to stop them. It is simply part of the tavern's steady pulse. Everyone is watching, drinking, scheming, and politely ignoring the man who has slid unconscious beneath a table. This place is not merely somewhere to eat and drink. It is a living, breathing performance, and tonight you have been cast in it. Set aside the lutes and ballads for a moment, because the genuine soundtrack of a medieval tavern is not a melody at all. It is an orchestra of pure disorder. It opens with the clink of mugs, dozens of them knocking against wood in celebration, in bargaining, or in poorly aimed enthusiasm. Some ring out cheerfully, others burst apart entirely, and both outcomes are greeted with equal applause. Then arrives the laughter, enormous and rolling from the belly, sounding as if it broke loose from a wild boar. Most of it makes no sense whatsoever. The farmer snorts at his own joke about hay. A knight dissolves into giggles at the word pottage. A monk wheezes helplessly each time anyone says duck, and you quickly learn to stop asking why. Voices stack upon one another, each striving to outshout the last, jostling for supremacy like roosters crammed into one coop. There is arguing, tail spinning, and shouting about taxes, plus at least one soul-mangling scripture to settle a wager. The keeper barks out orders while batting at flies. A barmaid rounds on a man who reached where he should not have, and somewhere a voice keeps repeating another round like a rallying cry. And in his corner sits the bard, lute half-tuned and short 3 strings, cycling endlessly through the same 4 chords, and occasionally erupting into verses about vanished loves, recovered chickens, or noblemen who wore their trousers backward. Hardly anyone truly listens unless he begins to sing about someone actually in the room, at which point matters turn either delightful or hazardous. Something gets spilled. Someone burps with force enough to rattle the rafters. Another man tumbles off his bench and simply keeps talking from the floor as though he planned it. Dogs bark in the background. A goat bleats, and no one can explain why there is a goat. Chairs drag across the packed dirt like thunderclaps echoing through a wooden cavern. It is far from peaceful, yet there is an odd rhythm to it. Every so often the room falls silent, not on purpose, just a sudden dip, and it holds for exactly 3 seconds before someone breaks it heroically and the music resumes. This is not mere background hum. It is the tavern's heartbeat, raw and rowdy and unstoppably alive. Listen carefully enough and it begins to cohere into a strange harmony born out of chaos, and like everything else here, it only swells louder the longer you linger. Once the ale is truly flowing and the stew has settled, the whole place shifts character and becomes something like a medieval gambling hall, minus the velvet ropes and with a great deal more shouting. Wagering is the evening's chosen sport, and everyone takes part, from battered old soldiers to barefoot boys clutching borrowed dice. There is no dealer, no floor manager, no oversight of any kind, only a splintered table, a scatter of copper coins, and the unspoken guarantee that someone is about to surrender their dignity. Dice lead the way, cut from bone, wood, or whatever material was handy. They rattle across the boards like distant thunder, and every throw is chased by cheers, groans, and mutterings about witchcraft. No one trusts them, and everyone plays them anyway. Then come the cards, at least in the more refined quarters of town, thick, hand-painted, frayed at the corners, and reliably missing 1 or 2. The rules bend to whoever is explaining them at the moment. Sometimes the aim is the highest number, sometimes matching symbols, and sometimes it is invented as the hand unfolds. It resembles poker with considerably more slapping. Stakes range from coins to mugs to livestock. Yes, one man has wagered a goat, another has staked his boots, and a third has bet his very freedom for the night, and, unsurprisingly, he lost it. The regulars are smooth operators who shuffle briskly, roll slowly, and grin a shade too widely. Cheating, naturally, and it is half the entertainment. A die tucked out of sight, a marked card slipped in, a suspicious cough the instant the lucky man leans forward. Win big, and you buy a round or risk being set upon. Lose badly and you smile, pretend it was intentional, and edge your chair gradually toward the exit. Smaller contests spring up too, arm wrestling, thumb wars, and the perennial favourite of who can drink the most while remaining upright. The victor collects applause. The loser collects a night beneath the table and an ache that lingers until the next market day. Even when the rules make no sense and the stakes are absurd, the thrill is impossible to resist because here luck is never just a game. It is a gamble with your coin, your pride, and quite possibly your trousers. As the night deepens and the room grows thick with warmth and damp, a fresh kind of performance takes over, one built from words, music, and confident nonsense. This is storytelling, medieval fashion. The bard clears his throat in his corner and coaxes a squeak from his half-tuned lute, the strings groaning like old leather. He has lost a few teeth but not a shred of self-belief, and with a grand flourish he launches into a ballad of heartbreak and valour, something about a knight who fell for a mermaid and drowned with great nobility while reciting verse. No one believes a word of it. Everyone listens regardless. That is simply how it works here. Truth is optional and entertainment is everything. Around the tables others chime in, not trained performers but ordinary drinkers, armed with ale-fueled courage and a story to share. One man swears he once wrestled a bear and survived to drink about it. Another insists he watched a witch turn a cow into a goat. A third claims kinship with Charlemagne through his mother's cousin's side. Nearly every account opens with, "You won't believe this, but," and they are quite right. We don't, and yet we long to. Boists swell into ballads, and small mishaps harden into myths. Someone tells a joke so dreadful it loops all the way back to funny. Someone else recites a poem almost certainly lifted from a monk's scroll. The room responds with clapping, hooting, or flung bread, depending on the quality or the quantity of the effort. If fortune favours you, a travelling minstrel might be passing through, one of the professionals who move from town to town trading songs for coins, meals, and the occasional night sheltered indoors. Their music is polished, their tales stretch long, and their power to stir a crowd is genuinely dangerous. Yet even they honour the golden rule of tavern law: never let facts spoil a fine story. In this smoky room, with the fire snapping and the mugs sloshing, storytelling is more than amusement. It is tradition and connection, the very means by which one makes friends, enemies, and the odd lifelong drinking companion. By midnight, half the tavern is acting out the saga of the one-legged knight who drove off 6 highwaymen armed with nothing but a ladle. You laugh, you cheer, you forget entirely that it was invented, because in a medieval tavern every liar becomes a legend, provided the tale is good enough. As the hours slip further and the ale keeps pouring, a new mood drifts into the air, a sort of drink-fueled boldness. The bard is midway through his 3rd song about unfaithful shepherdesses, and all at once the whole room feels romantic. Welcome to medieval courtship, where subtlety has quietly excused itself. It begins with eye contact, or at least one eye, squinting gamely through a mead-softened fog. A man with 2 remaining teeth leans across a bench and slurs that his lady's beauty outshines the very hearth. She answers by launching a crust of bread at his forehead, and the room roars with approval. Others make gentler attempts, offering refilled mugs, fumbling compliments, or a helpful hand carrying a bowl of stew so it does not spill. It spills anyway. Any woman in the tavern, whether staff, guest, or travelling trader, is by now well practised at deflecting at least 3 aspiring poets, 2 arm wrestlers, and 1 hopeful soul, attempting to impress her by balancing a knife on his nose. Occasionally it works. More often it ends in a bruised eye or a lightened purse. And for those genuinely seeking company, the tavern offers more than flirtation, as courtesans work the room with easy skill, reading at a glance who carries coin, who carries charm, and who will slip into unconsciousness long before ever reaching the stairs. Money changed hands quietly, yet what followed was rarely quiet at all. Consider the jealous lovers. Few things kindled a tavern quarrel faster than a lingering look, a hand that wandered where it shouldn't, or a husband who noticed his wife laughing a shade too warmly at the bard's cheeky verse about bishops. Over went the tables. Mugs became missiles. Another bench cracked cleanly down the middle. And yet, right in the thick of that uproar, something tender occasionally flickered to life. A bashful baker's daughter and a stonemason passing through would giggle over the same bowl of stew. A pair of tipsy farmers discovered a shared and passionate loathing of turnips. A monk found himself, quite by accident, flirting with a nun. Affection, or a near relative of it, managed to endure even in the loudest corners of the room. In the medieval tavern, courtship was a blend of charm, luck, and the modest triumph of not planting one's face in one's supper mid-sentence. A heart might be won, a slap might be earned. Either outcome made for a memory, or at the very least a tale to be passed around the following morning. Trouble, of course, was only a matter of time. Perhaps a drink was knocked over. Perhaps one man accused another of loading the dice. Perhaps 2 patrons laid claim to the same bench and neither would yield. Or perhaps someone made a passing remark about someone's mother, and whether she resembled a goat or a bowl of soup hardly mattered. In an instant it began. The tavern, moments earlier, A gentle haze of song and drink pivoted without warning. A stool sailed through the air. A tankard shattered on the boards. A voice hollered something like, "Hold my bread," and its owner vaulted a bench with all the elegance of a catapult that had been drinking. Nobody flinched. Most, in fact, kept right on sipping. A brawl in these years was not a rarity but an expectation, practically listed among the amenities. And though it sounded alarming, it leaned far more toward farce than tragedy. Fists were thrown wide, missed entirely, and their owners stumbled into someone's dinner. Hair was yanked, beards were seized, tunics were split at the seam. The keeper of the house bellowed like a general surveying a battlefield, a ladle in one fist and a cudgel in the other. Now and then a stranger flung himself into the scuffle with no notion of the cause, having simply spotted movement and decided to contribute. Others laid casual wagers, called encouragement, or quietly nudged their cups clear of the splash zone. Blades stayed sheathed. Most knew better than to draw one, since a naked knife could transform an ordinary tussle into a story people told for a generation, and no one wished to be barred from the sole establishment serving hot food and warm ale. Sooner or later a body met the floor and elected to remain there. Another wandered into a wall and concluded it was as fine a spot as any to sit and reconsider his choices. The fight guttered out like a tavern candle all at once and without ceremony. Here is the curious part. When it ended, it truly ended. The combatants were pried apart, cups were topped up, a song began, and inside 10 minutes the whole room was laughing once more, the fellow with the bleeding nose included. No grudges, no disputes to settle, only bruises, anecdotes, and perhaps a freshly minted nickname such as One-Eyed Arnold or Benjamin the Bench Breaker. In a place like this, a decent scrap was simply one ingredient of a decent evening, chaotic, absurd, and oddly unifying. Provided no one was badly hurt, it counted as another round of amusement. So the brawl subsides. The bard has collapsed partway through a ballad, and our traveller's belly is loaded with mystery stew and cider that has begun, faintly, to turn. Now comes the matter of sleep, or the attempt at it. But there would be no feather mattress, no linens perfumed with lavender. This was a tavern, after all, not a bathhouse retreat. Where lodging existed, it waited at the top of a groaning staircase, up past tilted floorboards and rafters set low enough to test the sturdiness of one's skull. The chambers were cramped, chilly, and unfailingly communal. Solitude was unheard of. A guest bedded down flank to flank with total strangers, some of them snoring like cathedral bells, others muttering their dreams aloud in tongues no one could place. As for the beds, most were sacks of straw, thin, lumpy, and busy with the small creatures. Medieval folk affectionately labelled companions. One lay down fully dressed, boots laced, a dagger tucked beneath the pillow, less for ease than for prudence. Blankets were shared, and so were odours. If anyone had eaten garlic that evening, and someone invariably had, it would weave itself into the night's dreaming. Those too broke, or too far gone, for a room settled downstairs, on a bench beneath a table, or in a corner near the hearth, curled beside a dog whose ownership was anyone's guess. Such a sleeper was liable to be trodden on, sneezed upon, and now and then mistaken for a footrest. The tavern never fully hushed. Long after the final cup ran dry and the last quarrel was patched over, there was always someone murmuring in his sleep, a log snapping in the fire, or some distant sound drifting up through the beams. And somehow, rest arrived all the same. It was neither comfortable nor clean, but it was safe enough. The fire held the worst of the cold at bay. The keeper stood guard with one eye open and a club within reach. The noise itself softened into a strange sort of lullaby, familiar, human, alive. One woke with a stiff neck, a parched mouth, and a bruise of uncertain origin. Yet for a handful of hours, sleep came in the company of wanderers, scoundrels, farmers, and fools. No kings, no silence, only snoring, straw, and the modest hope that one's boots would still be present at first light. Dawn slipped in like a guest no one invited, easing pale light through the gaps in the shutters and prodding at closed eyelids with unrelenting patience. Overnight the tavern had shifted, not truly quieter, but quiet in a beaten, hungover way. An eye cracked open, a boot rested on someone's chest. Nearby, a sleeper mumbled about the burden of sheep taxes. The bard snored beneath a table, cradling his takings like a sweetheart. A chicken picked its way across the floor, pecking at the crusts of yesterday's bread, and no one troubled to ask how it had gotten in. The fire had sunk to embers, leaving the room cold and thick with smoke. A few patrons began to stir, groaning like soldiers wounded in battles waged entirely within their own aching heads. One man sat upright, glanced about, and lay straight back down, having judged the day unworthy of the effort. The keeper, naturally, was already awake, clattering mugs, sweeping straw into tidy heaps, and reheating something in a pot that smelled at once welcoming and faintly out for revenge. He cast a glance over the bodies strewn about the floor, then rapped a ladle against a mug like a morning bell rung straight from somewhere unpleasant. Up or out, that was the summons. There was no breakfast spread. With luck, there was more pottage, thicker now than the night before. Bread was warmed again. Ale was thinned with water, and no one had the vigour to grumble. A few patrons simply plunged their heads into a barrel of rainwater outside and pronounced themselves refreshed. A quick check of the purse revealed 2 coins and a button, better than one might have feared. The boots remained, one bearing a fresh bite mark, but they were the right boots, and that was a triumph. New faces began to filter in, early risers, travellers, labourers, seeking a drink before facing livestock, levies, or worse still, the neighbours. The tavern roused itself again, like some great beast stretching awake. Someone launched into a retelling of the previous night, already reshaped, so that now there had been 2 brawls, and the drinking song had conjured a ghost. Everyone nodded as though it were scripture. The night had been mayhem. The morning was groggy, grimy, and steeped in regret. And still a smile surfaced, because against the odds one had come through it. By this point our traveller had tasted the sweat, the smoke, the tack of spilled ale beneath his boots. He had weathered the shouting, the flirting, the pottage, and quite possibly an airborne bench. And through all of it, a single truth came into focus. The medieval tavern was never merely a place to drink. It was the beating heart of the community. In a world without telephones, without printed news, without any web of messages, the tavern was where word actually moved. A merchant off the coast could pass along rumours from a distant harbour. The soldier could recount the war as he had seen it from the front lines. A bard could sing verses that knitted a room together, even if the words shifted with every performance. This was a house of connection. Farmers drank shoulder to shoulder with craftsmen. Pilgrims broke bread with thieves. Strangers turned into friends, or at least into drinking partners before the second round arrived. Here the lines between classes softened, rumours were born, alliances were struck, and grudges were either buried or stoked hotter, depending on how the dice happened to fall. The tavern was also where business got done. Bargains were sealed and agreements clasped over splintered tables and puddles of cider. It served as a courtroom, a confessional, and a playhouse all at once. In a single evening, a person might land a job, lose a purse, take a spouse, or set a feud in motion. And it offered one thing more, something no market stall could sell and no chapel could grant through prayer: relief. Relief from the cold, from the labour, from the unending gravity of merely staying alive in medieval times. For a few hours one could sit close to a fire, endure a poor joke, sing an even poorer song, and forget, briefly, how unforgiving the world beyond the door truly was. Even with warm ale, an itchy bed, and food carrying more bone than broth, the tavern granted a sense of being alive among the living. In an age when illness, war, or a merciless winter might carry a person off without warning, that was no trifling gift. So to cross the threshold of a medieval tavern was to purchase far more than a drink. It was to buy belonging, a story, and perhaps, if the floor was not too crowded, a spot to sleep where the fire still glowed. Long before cafes and pubs and coffee houses, there stood the tavern, loud, dirty, honest, and utterly impossible to forget. Long before she became the most recognizable face of ancient Egypt, preserved forever in a limestone bust with its sculpted cheekbones and its calm, self-assured stare, Nefertiti was a figure wrapped in question marks. Her name translates to "the beautiful one has come," yet no one can say with certainty where she actually came from. Some hold that she was the daughter of a high-ranking Egyptian official named Ai, and possibly even a sister to Akhenaten. Others contend she was a foreign princess dispatched to Egypt to seal a marriage between kingdoms. Her beginnings remain a matter of dispute, but her impact is beyond argument. She arrives in the historical record like a bolt of lightning, sudden, dazzling, and transforming everything it touched. She steps into Akhenaten's life, not as a decorative queen, but as a genuine partner, in a reign that would rattle the religious and cultural bedrock of Egypt. Side by side, the two of them set about undoing centuries of custom, casting aside the crowded family of traditional gods and raising the sun disk, the Aten, as the single true divinity. It was a bold and very nearly heretical stroke, and Nefertiti was no idle observer upon the throne. She presided over rites, presented offerings, and appeared in artwork striking down enemies, a pose ordinarily kept for male pharaohs. Where other queens were tucked into the background, she was everywhere. She surfaces in more surviving images from the era than Akhenaten himself. In those scenes she wears no posture of meekness. She stands tall, at times rendered larger than life, clutching power quite literally in her grasp. And in a culture that regarded pharaohs as gods, her nearness to Akhenaten, in matters both sacred and political, hinted at something greater. Perhaps she was not only queen, perhaps she was co-ruler. But such an ascent did not come without friction. Egypt was unprepared for the turmoil. The old priesthood bristled at the stripping away of their gods and temples. The capital was relocated to a brand new city, Akhetaten, known today as Amarna, severing the ties to the old order. And through all of it Nefertiti remained, her likeness carved into the stone walls, her name lifted in hymns to the sun. Yet for all that she was seen in life, her death is a total disappearance. No tomb, no remains, no confirmed ending, only silence. It is as though history, having displayed her brilliance, abruptly turned its face away. And that, perhaps, is precisely where her legend truly takes hold. To make sense of Nefertiti's rise, one must first become acquainted with the man who overturned everything, the Pharaoh Akhenaten. He did not enter the world under that name. He began as Amenhotep IV, a prince standing in a line of gods and traditions stretching back 1,000 years. Yet something within him had quietly changed. Some have called it divine inspiration, others have named it madness. Once the crown was his, he turned away from mighty Amun and proclaimed a single truth, that only one power deserved devotion, the sun overhead, the Aten. This was no small adjustment of belief. It was a tremor that split the foundations of Egyptian life. Picture a whole civilization organized around its temples, its priests, and its endless rituals. And then imagine being told in a single stroke that the old gods were counterfeit, and every act of worship suddenly meaningless. Akhenaten did more than describe this new faith, he imposed it. The sanctuaries of Amun were sealed shut. The god's name was cut away from the stone. Statues were broken apart. Whole towns were left empty. And in their place, the king raised something entirely his own, Akhetaten, a city devoted only to the Aten, where the sun would climb precisely between the cliffs and pour its holy light across the streets below. Through every part of this transformation, Nefertiti remained beside him, not as a quiet ornament, but as an equal presence. In the carvings of those years, she honors the Aten with the very same devotion as her husband. Their daughters appear again and again alongside them, small faces turned upward toward the glowing disk. It was a portrait of a family, unlike anything Egyptian craftsmen had shaped before, or would ever shape again. Even the artwork itself loosened. Gone was the rigid, ceremonial stiffness, replaced by something softer, more exaggerated, at times almost tender. The royal couple sharing a kiss, playing with their children, praying together in flowing robes beneath the sun. Nefertiti filled this new world completely, and now and then she seemed to eclipse the king himself. A number of historians believe she wielded genuine authority, perhaps even sat as co-ruler. Certain inscriptions call her Neferuaten, a name some think she took up once she began to govern in her own name. Whether Akhenaten shared his throne out of affection, calculation, or plain necessity is impossible to say, but one thing feels certain. Without her steadying presence, this revolution might never have lasted as long as it did. And yet revolutions are delicate things. The old gods do not step aside gracefully. The people simply watched from a distance, patient, waiting for the world they knew to come back. At the peak of her influence, Nefertiti had grown into more than a queen. She had become a symbol, admired not only for her beauty but for something like sacred womanhood joined to royal command. Egypt had known formidable queens before her, Amose, Nefertari, Hatshepsut, yet Nefertiti carried a different weight. She was not maneuvering from behind a curtain, nor seizing power through conquest. She was actively reshaping the spiritual and cultural life of the country, standing at her husband's side as a goddess made flesh. She gave Akhenaten 6 daughters, among them Meritaten, Meketaten, and Ankhesenpaten, all of them shown often in those warm family scenes beneath the sun's outstretched rays. Strangely, not one son was ever confirmed. In a land fixated on bloodlines, this was at once a political difficulty and a lasting puzzle. Was it simple chance, or was something else unfolding? A few have suggested the king may have fathered sons with other wives, or, in a far more contentious idea, with Nefertiti herself, feeding all manner of modern guesswork. What cannot be doubted is that motherhood sat at the very centre of how she was seen. In the reliefs, she holds her children close, their little arms lifting to brush her cheeks. These are not cold, unmoving figures. They are living instants pressed into stone, gentle, feeling, luminous. In an era when pharaohs stood remote as gods, showing Nefertiti as a caring mother brought the divine down to something recognizably human. But there was another face to her image, and this one held even greater force. In more than one depiction, Nefertiti wears the blue crown ordinarily kept for male kings. She is shown striking down enemies, driving chariots, presenting offerings with no Akhenaten in sight. These were not gentle symbols. Here was a queen carrying out the sacred labor of a king. It hints at a quiet but daring possibility. Nefertiti may have been readying herself for far more than a partnership. She may have been preparing to reign. History murmurs that as Akhenaten's health faltered, perhaps from inherited illness or the strain of his upheaval, Nefertiti shouldered still more of the governing. And it is here that the record begins to thin. In the closing years of his rule, she slips out of view. No ceremony, no funeral texts, no burial anyone can name. Did she die young? Was she pushed aside? Or was she on the verge of becoming something greater still, something the past would try and fail to wipe away? One moment she was everywhere, cut into walls, sung of in hymns, ruling alongside a revolutionary pharaoh. And then, like a breath scattered on desert wind, she was gone. No Egyptian queen had ever been so plainly visible. Yet around the 12th year of Akhenaten's 17-year reign, the records fall unnervingly quiet. Her name drops out of the inscriptions. Her likeness fades from the art. There is no tomb, no notice of her death, no scene of mourning. For a woman so vital to Egypt's great transformation, her disappearance is stranger than strange. It is a void in the historical record. So what became of her? One idea offers the plainest answer. She died. Childbirth was dangerous, even for royalty, and Nefertiti's second daughter, Akhenaten, also fades from the record around the same time, which might point to a double loss, a mother and daughter taken in one dark season. But if that was so, why no grand funeral, no offerings, no temple raised in her honor? This was a woman revered like a deity. A silent passing simply does not match the story. Others have reached for something more political. Perhaps she lost her standing. Perhaps the mood of the royal court shifted against her. An increasingly withdrawn Akhenaten might have set her aside, possibly in favor of another companion. Some point to a co-ruler called Sphinx, a shadowy figure who surfaces only briefly, as the one who took her place. Was this a male heir, a half-brother, or was Sphinx in fact Nefertiti under a fresh name? That leads to the most thrilling notion of all, that she never truly vanished but instead changed form. The evidence indicates that a ruler named Nefertiti governed in Akhenaten's final years, someone who used feminine grammar in the inscriptions and even spoke of Akhenaten as a beloved husband. Might this have been Nefertiti, crowned pharaoh in her own right? If so, she would have entered one of the rarest circles in Egyptian history, a woman ruling as king, much like Hatshepsut before her. But this theory too crumbles into sand. Nefertiti's reign breaks off abruptly, and then a more familiar name appears. Tutankhaten, soon to be Tutankhamun, a child king who would undo his parents' reforms and bring the old gods home again. If Nefertiti did rule alone, her time was brief. And if she was Smenkhkare or Nefertiti, she governed as a phantom queen, glimpsed only in fragments, half-finished cartouches and shattered relics, a puzzle whose central piece is missing. And so, as swiftly as she had risen, the most powerful woman in Egypt slips away. but her legend was only just beginning to form. As the dust of Amarna settled, a new figure stepped forward, a boy king scarcely old enough to lift a scepter. His name was Tutankhaten, later reshaped into Tutankhamun, and he would grow into the most famous pharaoh on earth, remembered not for anything he accomplished in life, but for the riches sealed inside his untouched tomb. What matters here, though, is a single question. Who was his mother? The records are maddeningly silent. His father was almost surely Akhenaten, but the identity of his mother remains wrapped in confusion. Some scholars hold that Nefertiti was his stepmother. Others suspect she may have been the woman who bore him, pointing to art and dates that seem to place him as a small child during her last public moments. If Nefertiti truly was his mother, it would fit neatly. His early years on the throne were plainly steered by a firm and practiced hand, and his choice to unwind his father's religious revolution may not have been entirely his own. And that is where the mystery grows richer. The boy was only about 9 when he took the crown. No child restores a shattered religious order by himself. Someone stood behind him, someone seasoned in the politics of the court, in matters of faith, and in the language of public symbols. Could it have been Nefertiti, governing from the shadows? Or the high priest Ai, who may well have been her father? Or perhaps the two of them together, working to smooth away the chaos of Amarna and return Egypt to its ancient gods? One of the more striking clues comes from a golden shrine discovered in Tutankhamun's tomb. It shows a woman anointing the young ruler, a woman whose features unsettlingly resemble Nefertiti. If that truly was her, then she may not have disappeared at all, but lingered at the center of power in a quieter guise. Still, with no tomb bearing her name and no confirmed body, we are left holding only fragments. If she did shape Tutankhamun's rule, her handprints are everywhere, yet her name is absent, scrubbed from the temples, omitted from the king lists, as though someone had labored to blot out the memory of a woman who once reigned like a god. And the irony runs deep, because Tutankhamun's own fame would eventually revive her. In chasing the story of the boy king, the world stumbled straight into hers. For a woman who stood at the heart of Egypt's most radical age, queen, priestess, and perhaps pharaoh, Nefertiti left behind no tomb anyone can verify. No sarcophagus, no funerary mask, no inscription murmuring her final words to the gods. It is as if she simply evaporated. This blank space has troubled Egyptologists for well over a century. In a culture consumed by thoughts of the afterlife, where even minor nobles were embalmed, wrapped and buried with careful instructions for the soul's journey, how could one of the most commanding women in the kingdom's history vanish so completely? The theories pile up. One holds that she was buried quickly and without ritual during the fading years of the Amarna period, that her radical legacy had made her a threat in the eyes of the new order. Her tomb may have been taken apart and her name struck out, all part of the wider campaign to erase Akhenaten's heresy. The return to the traditional gods came fast, and settling scores by chiseling away carved hieroglyphs was common enough. A second, more tempting theory suggests her tomb was never really lost, only mistaken for another, or still lying hidden. Some researchers have proposed that she rests within the Valley of the Kings itself, tucked behind the walls of Tutankhamun's own burial. In 2015, radar scans of KV-62, the celebrated tomb of King Tut, hinted at possible concealed chambers. Might Nefertiti have lain only inches away, sealed off and forgotten beneath layers of history and gold? The idea seized the world's imagination, a queen resting just out of reach. Egyptologists waited breathlessly, but the follow-up scans came back uncertain. Excavations slowed, the funding thinned, and once more Nefertiti withdrew into legend. And yet her absence rings out loudly. We hold her images, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, her likeness caught in stone and pigment. Her bust, now resting in Berlin, still gazes across the museum glass with a grace no one can quite explain, as though she knows something we do not, as though she is simply waiting. Each year the digs continue at Amarna and in the valley. Each year the murmurs return. Could a sealed chamber at last surrender her secrets? Could a cartouche lost in the sand finally spell out her true name? Or is she fated to stay the eternal riddle, an unfinished sentence somewhere in the middle of Egypt's story? If history meant to bury her, it did not manage it for long, because the search for Nefertiti never really ended. It only ran deeper. If her tomb was never found and her body never identified, why do we remember her at all? The answer waits behind glass, beneath soft lighting, in Berlin's New S Museum, a painted limestone sculpture that has held the world spellbound since it came back to light in 1912. The bust of Nefertiti. She looks straight ahead with calm and composure, her long neck elegant, her blue crown unmistakable, her features so finely worked that they seem almost modern. One eye was never completed, perhaps left that way on purpose, perhaps a small detail forgotten in the workshop's last days. Even unfinished, she is timeless, impossible to forget. The bust was uncovered by the German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt among the ruins of the sculptor Thutmose's studio at Amarna. When he swept the last of the dust from her features and looked upon her face, he understood at once the magnitude of what lay before him. In his journal he set down only a few words, admitting that description was pointless, that one simply had to see her for oneself. And once the rest of the world finally did, Nefertiti stopped being merely a name from the record and became something larger, a worldwide emblem of beauty, of authority, of the riddles that cling to the ancient past. Yet even the bust itself is tangled in dispute. Germany came into possession of the piece in an era when the rules governing antiquities were still lax, and for generation after generation Egypt has asked, politely and persistently, for her to be given back. In Egyptian eyes she belongs to the country whose people first shaped her, the soil where she once stood in the full glare of the sun. Germany has declined. The official reasoning is that she is far too delicate to survive the journey. Others suspect the real motive is prestige, plain and simple. Nefertiti fills galleries. She is, in the end, their answer to the Mona Lisa. Wherever she happens to reside, though, her influence has quietly reshaped the way we picture the women of antiquity. She was never a decorative object waiting to be admired. The sculpture holds something upright and commanding within it, a look that borders on defiance. She has the bearing of a person who kept secrets, weighed choices, and steered the fate of kingdoms. And by every indication, she truly did. There is something quietly astonishing in the way one carved head, so fragile and so wordless, can call a vanished person back into the light. We may never locate her burial place. We may never learn how her life ended. Yet through this single likeness, Nefertiti managed something rare. She slipped past death, not preserved in precious metal, but held fast in the memory of the living. The face itself never moves, and still the tale it carries goes on speaking, clearer now than it ever was, straight across the span of the centuries. Her story rests in the hush between stone and silence, in the gap that separates what can be proven from what we long to believe. Few people from the distant past have drawn such stubborn fascination while guarding such deep obscurity. She is a contradiction among the most pictured women of her age, and yet, at heart, still beyond our reach. Across the years she has been imagined as a great many things. To some she seemed a goddess wearing human form, divine loveliness made flesh. To others she was a shrewd political architect, the true power leaning behind the throne, or perhaps the throne itself. Some have cast her as a figure of romance, swept away amid the upheaval of her time. Others sketch her as driven and coldly capable, guiding a crumbling empire with grace and careful calculation. She appears in sacred ceremonies, in the grand rituals of the court, even in scenes of warfare, revealing a woman who did not merely stand near power, but held it in her own hands. In a world arranged for men, she made room for herself, not by open revolt, but through presence, through composure, through complete mastery of the visual and religious language of her day. We know, too, that she stood at the center of one of the most daring spiritual revolutions in all of history. Akhenaten may have dreamed up the single sun god faith, but it was Nefertiti who gave it a human face. She was the living picture of that divine ideal, the link joining the Aten shining above and the people gathered below. She did not simply attend upon the gods, she was, in a sense, their very image. And we know that once she vanished from the record, her memory came close to being wiped away entirely. The reaction against Akhenaten's rule dragged her name down into forgetting. Statues of her were broken apart. Her inscriptions were scratched out. Her place in the story was deliberately buried. And yet, 3,000 years on, here we still are, murmuring her name. Why should that be? Because legend has a way of outliving the facts that fail. Because when a woman turns into both an icon and a mystery at once, she settles into a place that the passing of time cannot touch. Because now and then, the unanswered questions ring out louder than any answer could. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is precisely what she would have wished, to be remembered rather than explained, admired rather than pinned down, to endure not as the occupant of a single tomb, but as a queen of endless wondering. More than 3,000 years have gone by since Nefertiti last moved beneath the Egyptian sky. Even so, her shadow reaches all the way into our own world, set behind museum glass, traded in hushed tones through university corridors, spread across the pages of novels and the running footage of documentaries. Unlike most who came before her, she is not dimmed with distance. If anything, she looms larger as the years accumulate. There is a pull to her that is hard to resist, and it is not only the beauty, for beauty is a thing we have met many times over. It is the mystery. The blank stretches in her life story feel almost intentional, like a quiet dare, as though she is inviting us to make sense of her, while knowing perfectly well that we never fully will. In that sense, she has become less a historical person than a lasting shape into which each age pours itself. Every generation remakes her in its own likeness. In the early 20th century, she was cast as an exotic queen, veiled and yielding. During the rise of feminist thought, she turned into a banner of female strength, an ancient ruler stolen away by centuries of erasure. In today's media, she is a fashion inspiration, an African monarch, a canny political operator, even a possible pharaoh in her own right. She has lived 1,000 second lives, not through evidence, but through imagination. In old Egypt, living forever was never only a matter of embalming the body. It was a matter of remembrance. So long as your name was spoken aloud, your image looked upon, your story passed along, you continued to exist. You could cross into the field of reeds, share a meal with the gods, carry on past the moment of death. Nefertiti, whether by cunning design or sheer accident, has done exactly that. Her name is uttered on every continent. Her face ranks among the most instantly known in the whole of human history. Her story, broken and incomplete as it is, still holds our attention. So in a curious way, her finest legacy was never chiseled into a tomb wall or sealed away under the desert. It was this stubborn curiosity she left behind. She handed down a flawless mystery, a life half glimpsed and half scrubbed out, and altogether impossible to forget. And maybe that was her last quiet exercise of power, not merely to govern a realm, not merely to reshape a religion or raise royal daughters, but to become untouchable by time. Nefertiti, the beautiful one who has come, never entirely departed. She lingers in our questions, in our wonder, in our stubborn wish to recall the women the past tried so hard to lose. She lives on, not through gold or grandeur, but in the endless act of being sought. And what, in the end, could be more immortal than that? Far away, in a corner of China, where the clouds settle low against the ridgelines, and the wind murmurs through stands of bamboo, a dragon lies curled upon the land. This one, though, is no creature of legend, no beast that breathes fire from old stories. It is made of soil and rock, shaped by centuries of hardened, labouring hands and unhurried imagination. These are the Longji rice terraces, known to the people who live there as the dragon's backbone, and their long curves ripple down the mountainside like scales, glinting with water and rice and a pride handed down through the ages. Seen from far off, the terraces really do take on the look of a slumbering animal. The hillsides fold in steady rhythm, each ledge lifting and dropping like the muscle of some living body. Draw nearer, though, and you find something more alive still. Water slides along its carved channels with a soft, whispering sound. Young seedlings tremble in the breeze. And at first light, a morning mist settles over everything, like slow breath drifting up from the dragon's nostrils. None of this was thrown together quickly. The tale reaches back more than 700 years, to the moment when the Zhuang and the Yao peoples, communities bound tightly to these mountains, chose to work with the slopes rather than turn their backs on them. Level ground was in short supply. Machinery did not exist. So they turned their eyes to the mountain and put to it a plain and honest question: how are we to feed ourselves in a place like this? The reply came slowly, across many lifetimes. Equipped with little beyond stone implements and baskets woven from bamboo, they cut into the hills, a hand's width at a time, one season after another. With every ledge they raised, they did more than reshape the ground. they coaxed it into breathing alongside them. Falling rain turned into a resource. The steep grade turned into nourishment. Rice, the very foundation of daily life, began to flourish in places where gravity had once held complete rule. As the years piled up, the terraces came to resemble a dragon at rest, sturdy, enduring, and somehow holy. This was something well beyond mere farming. It was a kind of harmony, a wordless agreement struck between people and the natural world. Nothing on the mountain was squandered, and nothing was wrenched harshly out of shape. Instead, the people moved with the earth, coaxing it into gentle curves and swells, heeding the wind, following where the water wished to go. To this day, the dragon's backbone still puts food on the tables of whole villages. More than that, it stands as a reminder of what patience alone can raise. In a world forever rushing ahead, here rests a dragon that was never hunted down, only carved out, ledge upon ledge, hope upon hope. To move among the Longji terraces is to enter a place shaped entirely by persistence. There is no trickery in it, no tread marks of machines, no surveyor's stakes planted by some distant company. What unrolls across these mountains is the fingerprint of plain human endurance. Every bend, every incline, every trickle of water was set in place, stone, by hands that understood the rhythm of the land. Long ago, when the Zhuang and the Yao first cast their gaze over these sharp and merciless slopes, they did not see barriers. They saw a chance. The good ground had already been claimed, the fertile valleys already planted. But up here, among the jagged summits, there was still a possibility waiting, if only they could persuade the earth to listen. Without any heavy equipment, they set to work with wooden spades, stone hoes, and baskets of mud and broken rock, hauled on backs worn down by the years. Gradually the terraces emerged, horizontal veins tracing across the mountain, kept in place by walls of hand-stacked stone. These were no careless gashes in the hillside. They were deliberate, each level balanced with precision, not only to cradle the water, but to pass it gently down from one tier to the next without a drop lost. A single error could bring an entire stretch tumbling down. Too sharp an angle and the water would race away. Too flat a bed and it would sit and go stale. So they took their measurements not with rulers but with intuition sharpened over generations. Children learn from their elders. The elders studied the turning seasons, and in due course the mountain relented, not out of defeat, but out of trust. From the floor of the valley up to the peaks that brush the clouds, the terraces climb like a spiral stair reaching for the sky. They trace the contours of the land so gracefully that one could almost believe the mountain had grown them on its own. But it did not. People did. With no engines, no poured concrete, and no diplomas in engineering, they had only time, only trial and error, only the conviction that ground, however steep, can be made to sustain life. Even now the terraces remain at work, still planted, still mended, still held in respect. No bulldozers arrive. No corners are cut. The old methods endure, not because they push back against the future, but because they proved something uncommon, that a tradition sunk deep enough into the soil can outlast every storm that comes for it. If the dragon's backbone is its muscle and its bone, then water is the blood that runs through it. It travels without a sound, needing no pump and no motor, following old channels that spill down from springs near the summit into each terrace below. This flowing choreography is nothing accidental. It is the hidden life of the terraces, the very reason they have lasted so long. High on the mountain, rainfall and natural springs are gathered into slender ditches and earthen canals. From there, gravity becomes the farmer's quiet partner. The water works its way down through terrace after terrace, gathering softly in each field before easing over into the one beneath. The whole arrangement, smooth and unbroken, sees to it that every plot of rice receives just what it requires, never too much and never too little. There are no valves, no switches to throw. Command over the flow rests in modest little gates of stone or wood, nudged open and shut by hand and by long habit. Should one terrace brim over, it may drown the next. Should one spring a leak, a dry spell might follow behind it. And so the villagers, keepers of this fragile machinery, tread the ridgelines day after day, checking, adjusting, listening closely to the sound of moving water. It is less like farming and more like coaxing music from an instrument. Strike one wrong note and the entire piece falls out of tune. Yet the water gives more than sustenance to the rice. It also holds up a mirror to the heavens. In spring, when the terraces are first flooded, the paddies turn to sheets of glass. They give back the clouds, the sun, and on a cloudless night even the stars overhead. Those who visit often call the sight otherworldly, as though the mountain had transformed into a living mirror catching both sky and soil at once. Then summer arrives. The water fills with rising blades of green. The reflection dissolves and gives way to motion, countless rice plants rocking in the wind like a wide sea of emerald. In autumn, sunlight slides across the water and mingles with the gold of grain, grown heavy and ready. Then winter comes, the farming stops, and snow and frost take the place of the moving current. The dragon sleeps, yet its channels stay, quiet veins holding their breath until spring. Here, time keeps a different measure. Not hours, but moisture. The chorus of frogs coming back, the smell of soil that has drunk its fill. While much of the world counts its life in seconds, the people of Longji still count in seasons and in drops. And so the dragon lives, not through fire or flight, but through the slow ripple of water moving gently across a living work of stone and earth. Spring in the Longji Mountains does not open with flowers. It opens with water. As snow softens on the higher summits, streams thread their way down and pour life into the waiting terraces. The paddies lie flat and mirrored, ready. The dragon shifts, and the people ready themselves for the rite that binds them to everyone who came before, the setting of the first seed. Nothing is announced. There is only quiet movement. Farmers of every age rise while the mist still hangs low. They pad barefoot along the thin ridges, straw hats pulled down, baskets steadied on their backs. The wind carries the smell of drenched earth off the slopes. The paddies, flooded only days ago, gleam now like polished jade. This has never been work for machines. Each seedling, raised first in nursery beds, is moved by hand, one after another, row after row. The workers wade into the cold shallows and settle the slender shoots into the mud with careful fingers. The motion takes on something close to reverence. Bend the back, reach the arm, press with the hand, and again, hour upon hour, week upon week. Children trail behind, splashing and copying their elders. They learn nothing from a book here. They learn by standing in the water, feeling the mud push back, judging the spacing with their eyes. That is how what is known stays alive in this place, carried in the doing rather than the telling. Planting is far more than work. It is ceremony. Offerings are set out for the spirits of the mountain. Songs rise over the fields. In certain villages, an elder casts the first handful of seedlings as a blessing. Every planted field is a promise. To the land, to the ancestors, to the children not yet born. Nothing hurries. No one presses the dragon. No one outruns the mountain. Instead, the steady labor becomes a kind of meditation, a slow partnership of people and place, of patience and purpose. Day by day, the first green shoots lift from the flooded fields like something half-whispered. From here the terraces will grow, and not only rice, but hope. Each seed a small prayer, each row a gentle refusal to give in to hunger or haste. So the cycle turns once more, begun not with clamour or flame, but with hands in the mud and thoughts lifted to the sky. The dragon is awake. The mountain draws breath. The season ahead is planted, one seed at a time. Tucked along the ridge lines and folded into the bends of the terraces are the beating hearts of the dragon's backbone, villages such as Pingan, Dazai and Zhongliu. They are not simply places to live. They are living archives of heritage, where every house, footpath and balcony grips the mountainside like a memory that will not let go. The homes are timber, raised on stilts against the rains and the tilt of the slope. Their dark, slanting roofs echo the sweep of the terraces below. Seen from above, they look like wooden lanterns riding waves of green. Within, life is plain, warm, and closely shared. Several generations live under one roof. Food is cooked over open wood fires. Rice wine and bamboo smoke scent the mountain air. The people here are of ethnic minorities, the Zhuang and the Red Yao, each holding their own language, customs, and stories. The Yao women are unmistakable. Their long black hair never cut since girlhood and wound into graceful coils atop their heads. Some let it spill loose like a curtain of silk when they wash at the river, a sight so lovely it edges toward legend. Even as modern ways climb the mountain paths, the old ones hold firm. Cloth is still woven by hand and steeped in indigo. Wooden looms still creak in still rooms. Reed pipes and bronze drums still sound through the village festivals. Weddings still carry their ritual dances. The harvest is still greeted with song. Here, welcoming a guest is not a bargain, but an instinct. Visitors are given tea drawn from local leaves, rice wine poured from carved gourds, and tales handed down by elders who recall the mountain before the first electric light. They tell of dragons in the fog, of ancestors who first cut these hills into steps, of spirits that watch the fields even now. And though travellers arrive today from every part of the world, the pulse of village life carries on, mostly untroubled. The rice still ripens. The rites still mark the turning year. The terraces, like the people, last, not by fighting change but by taking it in slowly and with care, the way water eases down from one level to the next. Inside the dragon's coils, life does not rush. It flows, it echoes, it remembers. To move through the terraces of Longji is to move through layers of myth. These hills are more than soil and rock. They are thick with stories murmured among the bamboo and passed along on the wind. To the villagers, the mountains are not just ground but sacred beings, shaped by gods, watched over by spirits, and filled with tales carried down the generations. The oldest legend tells of a sleeping dragon whose body lies stretched along the ridges, its spine curling upward into the terraces themselves. Many believe the folds of the mountain are no human handiwork, but the dragon's scales, rising and settling with each breath. When fog drifts up from the valley and blankets the paddies in white, they say the dragon stirs and breathes softly in its sleep. Another story holds that the terraces were a gift of heaven. In a time of famine, the ancestors climbed the peaks and prayed, and the gods, touched by their faith, sent rain and told them to cut the hills into steps where rice could grow. They obeyed, and the dragon came to steady their hands. Ever since, they have treated the mountain with respect, never raising their voices in the fields, never felling a tree without a prayer. None of this is written down. It lives in the songs of the planting, in the incense lit before a new growing season, in the hush held through foggy mornings. Children grow up taking these tales not as fancy, but as truth rooted in the land. To mock the dragon is to court a poor harvest. To slight the spirits is to invite flood or drought. There are spirits in the water as well. Some farmers still leave an offering before letting the spring water into the terraces for the first time each year. A few drops of rice wine and a prayer said low, not for display but as habit, as ordinary as fastening a shoe. Believe in dragons or not, something hallowed lingers in the air. Perhaps it is the quiet, perhaps the clouds. For hundreds of years the dragon's backbone stayed a secret. The mountains kept, remote and hushed, known only to those born to it. But no place, however sacred, stays untouched forever. The road arrived, and the wires came after. Tourists, cameras and smartphones climbed the hills beside the farmers, and the terraces, old and weathered, met a question they had never faced before. How does a place like this survive the modern age? At first there was unease. Some feared the mountain would be parcelled off to developers, that concrete would crowd out wood, that a way of life would harden into a costume. But the people of Longji did more than hold on. They adjusted, not by casting off the past, but by threading the present through it, one careful strand at a time. Households began welcoming guests, not as a resort but as a family stay. Visitors share the local table, sticky rice steamed in bamboo, wild greens gathered that same morning, and sleep in timber-stilt houses where roosters still call up the dawn. Nothing is staged for the camera, it is simply lived, plain and true. And the farming goes on. Every season the locals still flood the terraces, still plant by hand, still cut the crop with sickles worn smooth over years. The children sit in school by day and lend their hands in the fields at dusk. Tourism may bring money, but rice brings life, and each holds up the other. Some of the young leave for the cities, yet many find their way home. Something in the terraces pulls at them, deeper than mere longing, the sound of water gliding through the channels, the mirror of stars on the paddies, the way the mountains teach a person to wait. The festivals have grown louder now, microphones where drums once stood alone, signs in Mandarin and English beside the sacred springs. Still the rites go on, still the offerings are laid, still the elders lead the singing. The dragon's backbone did not push change away. It took it in with grace and with balance. The terraces endure, not because they are held frozen, but because they move with time, bending and shifting, yet never snapping. In an age that so often trades tradition for progress, Longji stands as quiet evidence that progress can tread lightly when it chooses, and that the old ways still have a place in the new world, all the more when they are this beautiful. The dragon's backbone is never the same twice. With each season, it sheds its skin, changes its colours, alters its mood. Cities take years to shift, but the terraces change in weeks, wrapped not only in light but in rhythm. To stay among them across a full year is to watch a mountain draw breath. Spring comes like a mirror. The terraces are flooded for the planting, and the motionless water gives back the sky like sheets of silver glass. Clouds seem to drift both overhead and underfoot. Travellers speak of walking through heaven. The fields look bare, yet they brim with promise, and beneath the surface something is already waking. Summer floods everything with green. The young rice climbs tall and straight, draping the hills in an emerald tide. From a distance, the terraces resemble ribbons of velvet unrolling in every direction. The air turns warm and damp. Frogs call across the paddies. Farmers stand knee-deep from first light to last, their hats bobbing like small sails on a jade sea. Autumn turns gold, the time of harvest. The rice comes ripe and the terraces seem to catch fire in the sun, aglow with grain. The fields sway in the wind while drums sound through the villages. Families come together. Songs are raised. Sticky rice is cooked. It is not merely a season but a celebration, the dragon fully awake and offering its yield. Winter settles the mountain into quiet. The terrace is empty. The water is let out. Snow falls at times, powdering the steps in soft white, and at others frost laces itself along the walls. No tools cross the fields. No voices carry, only silence. The dragon sleeps, resting, waiting. Each season composes its own poem. Spring reflects, summer grows, autumn feeds, winter rests. The wonder of Longji lies not only in its shape, but in its cycle, in the way it takes time as it comes and reshapes itself without a sound, never needing to draw notice to the change. Photographers come chasing the light, hoping to hold something that lasts. But the terraces pause for no one. They move. They breathe. They quietly teach that beauty is never fixed, that it is a rhythm, a practice, a promise renewed with each turning season. And so the dragon comes around again, not with a roar or a flame, but with water, grain, and wind. In the end, the terraces are more than fields. They are a kind of vow, hushed and curving, cut into the flank of the mountain. A pledge handed along from one pair of hands to the next, from one season into the season that follows, from each generation to the one it raises. The dragon's backbone is more than an agricultural marvel or a triumph of engineering. It is the record of what unfolds when people decide to make their living alongside the land, rather than in opposition to it. Gentler options had always existed. The forebears of Long might have descended into the valleys and gone in search of level ground, yet they remained where they were. They read the pitch of the hillside, they paid attention to the rock, they traced the paths the water wanted to take, and by doing so they turned the impossible into the everyday, coaxing whole villages' worth of food out of a slope. Each bend carries a teaching, and not only about rice. About patience as well, about inheritance, about tending things with care. These terraces did not take shape across a handful of years, or even across decades. They required centuries. There is no quick route to balance of this kind, no machine that can stand in for the understanding worn into every stone wall by roughened hands and unhurried resolve. And still, none of it is fixed in place. The terraces are living things. They shift. They lean into the weather, into what the people happen to need, into the changing outline of the wider world. That is the quiet heart of them. They were never stiff. They were always yielding. Even today, as the modern age scales the hillsides with its signals and its glowing screens, the terraces stay rooted. They alter without disappearing, because what anchors them is not soil alone. It is story, it is ritual, it is the plain and lasting gesture of setting a seed into the earth and placing faith in the sky. To walk the dragon's backbone is to observe an agreement drawn up between people and the ground beneath them, an agreement sealed with sweat and sunlight and renewed with each gathering of the crop. It reminds us that moving forward need not mean moving fast, and that what is great does not always announce itself loudly. Now and then it merely hums, the way a stream slides over stone. Perhaps that is the reason the terraces reach so many, farmers and travellers and dreamers alike, for they stand for something we have very nearly let slip from memory, that the most enduring things are shaped not through force but through rhythm, modesty, and the passage of time. The dragon rests, the people carry on, and the mountain holds it all in mind. Most who come to Giza raise their gaze upward, pulled toward the looming outlines of the pyramids and the steady stare of the great Sphinx, yet very few stop to wonder what might rest below. Beneath the sand, beneath the Nile, beneath long ages of currents nobody remembers. For in the still, shallow water near the old settlement of Abu Rawash, only a little way from the Giza plateau, a curious story begins to stir. It tells of something immense, worn down and overlooked. A sphinx beneath the water. The fishermen of the area have murmured about it for generations, a shape with a smooth back that appears too even to have formed by chance, a cat-like figure sunk halfway into mud and sodden sediment. When droughts pull the Nile lower, portions of its surface. Curved stone, shallow grooves, and what a few insist is a carved paw, impossibly weathered yet plainly touched by human hands. It lies nowhere near the visitor trails. There are no signs, no roped-off walkways, no idling coaches full of tourists. Only a stretch thick with reeds, brackish shallows and quiet. Those who have made their way out to it say the place itself feels altered, somehow charged, as though memory still lingers there. Below the murk, sonar sweeps have registered geometric shapes and what look like blocks set down on purpose. But the truly unsettling part is the suggestion that this form, a sphinx-like mass drowned near Giza, might come before the pyramids entirely, not by a matter of decades but by thousands of years. If that were so, it would upend the accepted order of Egyptian history. The standard timeline fixes the Great Sphinx at somewhere around 2500 BCE, but this submerged shape, should it prove to be carved, could belong to an era when the Sahara was still green and the Nile spilled freely across a damper, more abundant landscape. Doubters, naturally, wave it away as a rock that has been mistaken for something more. Limestone shaped by water and by hopeful imagination. Yet the grooves, the curves, the way it seems to line up with markers in the heavens, all of it raises more questions than it settles. The site sits undug. Established archaeologists have mostly turned away from it. Perhaps it amounts to nothing. Perhaps it amounts to everything, a remnant not only of Egypt's past, but of an entire world erased by flood and by time. For the present, the so-called underwater Sphinx stays silent, not asleep, but waiting. And if it were able to speak, one has to wonder what it might reveal, and why so many appear so unwilling to hear it. The tale drifted out of hushed folklore and into worldwide fascination during the 1980s. That was when a handful of independent researchers and divers started releasing peculiar accounts. Descriptions of an enormous, lion-bodied form partly sunk near the Giza Plateau. The earliest photographs were blurred, unconvincing, and easy to dismiss. But they set loose something that could not be gathered back up: curiosity, and more troublingly, doubt. Among the loudest of the early believers was a self-taught Egyptologist who said he had glimpsed a weathered monument far down beneath silt and layers of flooding during a short window of drought. To his mind, the figure was no lone boulder, no trick of erosion. It possessed geometry, limbs, symmetry, even the ghost of a carved face. That, of course, unsettled the accepted account. Egyptology as a field rests upon order and settled dates. Most scholars set the raising of the Giza pyramids and the Great Sphinx at roughly 2500 BCE in the reign of the Pharaoh Khafre. The notion of a second Sphinx, older and half-drowned, would demand a rethinking not merely of Egyptian history, but of the whole chronology of human civilization. The academic mainstream answered with caution, and at times with scorn. Absent peer-reviewed excavation, carbon dating, or the study of sediment layers, the claim could not be treated as serious. Many held that the supposed underwater Sphinx was in all likelihood a natural formation, limestone worn down by thousands of years of Nile floods and creeping erosion. In Egypt, they noted, nature often imitates the deliberate. Wind, water, and time are gifted sculptors in their own right. Still, the photographs kept passing from hand to hand. The sonar traces went on showing strange patterns, too regular, too smooth, too suggestive to ignore entirely. And then arrived the theorists. Authors, filmmakers, and historians on the fringe began weaving tales around the puzzle, that the Sphinx was the leftover of some vanished people, Atlantean perhaps, or perhaps a pre-dynastic Egyptian one, undone by a flood that scoured the Sahara clean. They pointed to the water-worn patterns on the original Great Sphinx, made their case for lost technologies, and hinted that whatever lay under the Nile might reach back further than accepted memory permits. The argument swelled in volume, yet the earth stayed undisturbed. No official excavation began, no museum laid claim to it, and the Sphinx, if that is truly what it is, stayed exactly where it had always been, sunk in silt, suspended between myth and mud. The suggestion that something near Giza might predate the pyramids is not merely striking, it is upending. If the underwater Sphinx is more than erosion or accident, then Egypt's tale did not open in the 4th dynasty. It opened before that, far back in prehistory, when the Sahara was a green plain, and the Nile wandered broader, wilder, and less tamed. The possibility drew fresh attention in the 1990s, when the geologist Robert Schoch examined the Great Sphinx directly. He argued that the deep vertical wearing on the Sphinx's enclosure was not the work of wind and sand at all, but of rainfall, heavy and sustained ancient rain, the kind that had not fallen on the Giza Plateau since at least 7000 BCE. That reasoning shifted the possible age of the Sphinx back by thousands of years, well before the earliest pharaohs cut their names into stone. If water shaped the first Sphinx, could water also have concealed an even older sibling? The supposed underwater Sphinx rests in a lower area beside old floodplains, Certain satellite images and ground-penetrating radar hint at possible foundations, rectangular edges, and intentional shaping, all sunk beneath silt and seasonal water. Such traces suggest the site may not only be older than the Sphinx, it may come from a moment when nothing in Egypt had yet been written in hieroglyphs. Those who favour the theory point to Egypt's absent chapters, the long gap between the close of the Ice Age and the emergence of the first dynasties. In that span, the Nile changed its course. The Sahara turned from wet grassland into dry desert, and whole cultures may have risen and fallen, unrecorded and wiped away. The thought that an ancient people, without writing and without pharaohs, could have shaped a monument on such a scale strikes traditional historians as far-fetched. But is it truly? Göbekli Tepe, in Turkey, was raised around 9600 BCE by hunter-gatherers. It holds massive stone pillars carved with animals, older than Stonehenge by thousands of years. Might Egypt guard a comparable secret, some ancient society that pressed its mark into the land in stone long before papyrus ever carried its stories? Should the underwater Sphinx belong to such an age, it would overturn everything we believe about human history. It would imply not merely forgotten ruins, but a forgotten epoch, one that may have murmured to the builders of Giza, leaving behind more than legend, perhaps a monument drowned and then lost to memory. Stone does not deceive, it remembers. And around the site of the so-called underwater Sphinx, it tells a low but stubborn story, one not only of time but of water. Layers of sediment, marks of erosion, and the patterns of old floods hint at a past that stretches back long before the desert dried, long before the Nile eased into its familiar bed, long before the pharaohs pressed their names into the record. Geologists who have studied the photographs and data from the site near Abu Rawash observe unusual erosion, smooth and rounded grooves that speak of lengthy exposure to moving water. Not wind, not sand, but rain and current, forces that have been absent from the region for thousands of years. Much the same has been said of the Great Sphinx itself, and of its enclosure wall in particular. Those who doubt the standard timeline observe that the deep vertical channels in the trench surrounding the Sphinx look nothing like the effects of wind. They resemble rain, heavy and sustained rain from prehistory, and now, at the possible underwater Sphinx site, the very same signature appears, this time tucked beneath a shallow flood basin. When the Nile runs low, or when someone digs, portions of the structure are said to lift into view, lion-like haunches, shoulders, a base that seems too even to be an accident of nature. Researchers who have surveyed the ground note that the basin is geologically restless, rich in play, with signs that ancient water tables once swung wildly up and down. The stone there is heavily worn, though not at random. The wearing follows the outline of the structure itself, running in lines that suggest careful carving, and then a drowning. Some of the sediment around the site dates to the early Holocene, when Egypt was wetter, greener, and given to enormous floods. Had a monument been carved in that period, it could have stood for centuries before the mud closed over it, forgotten by populations on the move and buried under the Nile's drifting silt. The doubters call it all coincidence, natural shapes teased into legend by wishful eyes. But water does not build symmetry. It does not carve a pore. It does not lay down aligned foundations or echo the form of a known Sphinx sitting only a few miles away. So the question grows deeper. If water swept this monument out of sight, what else might it have carried off? And more pressingly, how much of history still waits, unseen, below the surface? If the underwater Sphinx is genuinely there, silent, carved and old, why has it never been dug free? Why does it stay under layers of mud and quiet, stepped around by archaeologists, disregarded by governments, and surrendered to the currents? The answer, much like the object itself, lies out of sight. Egypt's institutions of archaeology are guarded, and rightly so. The country protects its ancient inheritance with strict procedures, firm rules for excavation, and a demand for scholarly agreement. To open any site, above all one that unsettles the accepted timeline, calls for permits, funding, oversight from abroad, and, most crucial of all, institutional consent. And that consent tends to hinge on a single unspoken condition: that Egypt's history is not to be rewritten without a mountain of evidence beyond dispute. There lies the difficulty. The so-called underwater Sphinx has never been granted an official, state-backed excavation. Independent researchers, foreign scholars and fringe theorists have all looked into the area, but lacking formal support, their findings stay anecdotal, suggestive yet far from conclusive. There is also the matter of the Nile itself. A river is never a fixed thing. It swells, retreats, and wanders across the centuries. The place where the monument supposedly lies is prone to flooding, and for much of the year it sits underwater entirely. To dig there, one would first have to drain the ground, redirect the current, shield the surrounding habitats, and cope with the structural harm left by ages of sediment pressing down. That effort by itself might stretch across years, perhaps decades. And then there is politics. A find of this scale, were it ever confirmed, would unsettle far more than a few academic calendars. It could unravel accepted stories, bruise national pride, and summon a wave of media attention that Egypt may have little wish to invite. The Ministry of Antiquities tends to favour discoveries that burnish the country's splendour rather than ones that cast doubt on its origins. A few murmur that certain institutions may already understand more than they let on, that quiet preliminary surveys have taken place well out of view. Yet without public records, reviewed research, or any official word, such talk slides easily into conspiracy. So the monument stays where it is. By chance or by choice, it rests beneath mud and doubt alike. It is a curious irony that in a land so devoted to guarding its ancient heritage, one of its deepest mysteries might be sitting in plain sight, unclaimed, unexamined, and absent from the official ledger of time. But nothing remains buried forever. For the ancient Egyptians, the Sphinx was never merely a carving. It stood as a symbol, part protector, part deity, part riddle. With a lion's body and a human face, it embodied strength married to wisdom, raw power steadied by a royal mind. It was a cosmic watchman set at the boundaries where the divine brushed against the mortal world. The best known, naturally, is the Great Sphinx of Giza. Rising some 66 feet, it has kept its post on the plateau for more than 4,000 years, turned toward the sunrise, keeping watch over the resting places of pharaohs. Its true origin is still argued over. Some credit Khafre with building it. Others suspect it is much older, its features reshaped by later hands. So what would it mean if a second Sphinx, hidden, warmed by water, and possibly more ancient, waited only a few miles off? It would overturn a great deal. No known text describes twin sphinxes at Giza. The old writings say nothing. Yet in later Greco-Roman law there are hints of guardians set in pairs, framing sacred ground. And in Egyptian design, symmetry was holy. Temples so often held twin statues, twin obelisks, paired avenues of lions. Why not twin sphinxes as well? Some researchers propose that the supposed underwater Sphinx might not be a copy at all, but the first of its kind, a prototype, a pre-dynastic model that was later reproduced on a grander scale. If that held true, it would imply that the very notion of the Sphinx came not from dynastic architects, but from some forgotten people whose stories were carried onward, borrowed and polished. And if the monument came before writing itself, it need not answer to any pharaoh's ideology. Its purpose might have been astronomical, ceremonial, or simply commemorative, marking an event, a great flood, or a god long since forgotten. The lion form is no accident either. In ancient Egypt, lions stood for the horizon, the doorway of dawn and dusk. A sphinx that faces east watches the sun be reborn without end. To carve one was to hold that sacred moment fixed in stone. Now picture one shaped before the pyramids ever stood, aligned, standing guard, quietly waiting. It would not merely rewrite the record. It would recast the whole mythos of Egypt, no longer the dawn of civilization, but the final echo of something older still. And that such a symbol might lie sleeping beneath the water seems only fitting for a guardian of vanished worlds. As talk of the underwater Sphinx spreads farther around the globe, a quiet rift has opened, one running deeper than any layer of sediment or stone. On one side sits traditional Egyptology, careful, orderly, and grounded in scholarly agreement. On the other stands a swelling crowd of independent researchers, alternative historians, and inquisitive minds convinced that something remarkable is being passed over. Mainstream scholars ask for proof, for reviewed studies, for the reading of rock layers, for inscriptions and radiocarbon dates. Their caution is hardly misplaced. Egypt is dotted with natural formations that happen to resemble people or animals, and mistaking one for a relic can breed misinformation. Archaeology, after all, has to move slowly. The past is delicate. Once broken by careless hands or media excitement, it cannot be put back together. But to the other camp, caution has hardened into complacency. Independent investigators, many of them trained as scientists or engineers in other fields, insist that the underwater Sphinx and its like deserve closer inspection. They point to high-resolution satellite imagery that shows symmetry too clean to be natural, to scans that pick out rectangular foundations under the mud, to weathering that appears shaped by intention rather than by mere chaos. They also wonder about the political reasons for the silence. Tourist money flows through the familiar monuments. A new Sphinx, particularly one that unsettles the agreed-upon timeline, could disrupt both Egypt's story and its authority. The worry, they suggest, is not of a hoax, but of having to rewrite everything. Books, documentaries, podcasts and conferences now return again and again to the underwater Sphinx. It has become an emblem of hidden history, serving as both rallying cry and cautionary tale. Supporters press for open excavation, critics warn against pseudoscience. And the truth, as ever, is misplaced somewhere in between, buried under voices as thick as the Nile's own silt. The rift is not purely academic, it is emotional. It touches on how we choose to approach the past. Do we trust only what has been verified? Or do we chase the hints that sit just out of reach? The underwater Sphinx drags that question into the open. It is not simply a rock or a relic. It is a test of how curious we are permitted to be. And as long as it stays unearthed, both sides will go on debating above a monument that says nothing, yet might change everything. There is something haunting about a mystery buried in plain sight, all the more so when it wears a lion's face and gazes up from the mud in ancient stillness. The so-called underwater Sphinx near Giza may or may not be real, but its pull cannot be denied. It stirs something within us, a longing not only to discover, but to remember. For at its root, the tale of a forgotten monument touches something older than archaeology itself, the human sense of loss. We have always lived alongside ruins. Cities crumble, languages fall silent, whole civilizations slip beneath waves, sand and ash. We turn to the past not only for answers, but for a sense of who we are. Who were we? How far back do our stories truly reach? And what have we let slip in our hurry toward progress? If the underwater Sphinx is genuine, if it was carved by hands that worked before recorded history, then it becomes far more than a relic. It becomes a voice from a chapter we never knew was written, a marker from an age when people might have read the stars in another way, held the earth in closer regard, or kept a mythology we can now only guess at. Some hold that it belongs to an advanced prehistoric culture erased by global catastrophe, an idea often waved away as fringe. But whether or not that proves right, the emotional weight stays. To picture a monument carved long before the pyramids, then swallowed by rising water and forgotten, is to face just how fragile civilization really is. Perhaps that is why the story lingers. It reminds us that time does not run in a straight line, that empires are only borrowed, that even stone can vanish if the river runs long enough. More than that, it reminds us that discovery is not finished, that the earth still keeps secrets no textbook has recorded. In an age of instant answers and endless data, the underwater Sphinx is a rare thing, an open question, a possibility, a mystery no drone or algorithm has yet resolved. And whether it turns out to be plain rock or a lost monument, it already carries worth, because it makes us wonder. Wonder whether the past runs deeper than we assumed. Wonder whether myth might hold a kind of memory. Wonder what waits just below the surface for someone willing to notice. The underwater Sphinx of Giza, carved or accidental, confirmed or dismissed, remains where it has always been, below the surface, below the mud, the water, and the long weight of time. It bears no plaque, no name, no beam of light, and still it speaks quietly through the absence of answers. For every monument Egypt has uncovered, others lie waiting, unrevealed. Some are too fragile to disturb. Others have been lost to the shifting Nile, drowned under layers of silt and secrecy. And a few, like this one, sit in full view, overlooked not for any lack of importance, but because they ask questions we are not yet prepared to answer. Perhaps that is what gives the underwater Sphinx its power, not its size, not its age, but its silence. It presses us to face the edges of what we know and the unease of what we may have missed. In truth, it may never be excavated at all. Politics, funding and tradition raise walls higher than any tomb. Yet that hardly makes it meaningless. If anything, the reverse. The monument's very obscurity has turned it into a mirror, reflecting not only what lies buried, but what we choose to keep and what we choose to let go. It reminds us, too, that history is no closed book. It is a living puzzle strewn across coastlines and countrysides, waiting for a turn of the tide, a shift in thinking, or one bold question to disturb the dust. Perhaps someday the water will draw back, and the whole shape will rise, base, face and all. Perhaps radar will confirm what myth has long suspected, or perhaps the mystery will endure, handed down through the generations like a whisper passed between stones. But monument or mirage, the underwater Sphinx already fulfills its greatest role. It stirs the imagination. And in a world so heavy with certainty, that may be the finest gift it has to give. Because perhaps the most ancient things are not only buried in sand or in time, perhaps they are buried within us, in our urge to explore, to remember, and to trust that somewhere out there beneath the waves or the desert, the past still breathes and still waits to be found.